The drive to the lake always felt like stepping into another world. The winding dirt road cut through dense pine and oak, the scent of fresh earth and pine needles filling the air. It had been weeks since I'd had time to escape, and the idea of spending a quiet afternoon by the water was almost intoxicating. My old truck rattled over a fallen branch as I approached the familiar clearing, and there it was, the small wooden dock jutting into the still, glassy lake, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. The serenity of the place never failed to calm me. As I slowed down, I noticed movement near the property line. A woman, unmistakably the HOA's resident watchdog, was striding along the edge of the lake. She had that signature look of entitlement, hair perfectly coiffed, sunglasses perched arrogantly on her nose, and a clipboard in hand as if she were inspecting a government facility. I didn't need a second glance to know it was Karen. Her presence here was as unwelcome as it was predictable. "Community access," she called out before I could even say hello. "This lake is for everyone in the neighborhood." Her voice carried over the still water, sharp and demanding, the kind of voice that made the birds scatter in alarm. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the irritation twisting in my stomach. I had been through this before. The lake had belonged to my family for generations, a piece of land passed down with pride and care. It was private. Always had been. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, and gave her a nod, not a greeting, just acknowledgement. She didn't seem to notice or care, too busy scanning the shoreline as though she owned every blade of grass. I felt a flicker of amusement. This was Karen's version of power, but here, at my lake, her authority was meaningless. I walked toward the gate that led into the main property, my hand brushing over the familiar, weathered wood. The air smelled of water, wildflowers, and the faint tang of fish. For a moment, I let myself imagine the quiet afternoon ahead, the line cast into the water, the sun glittering on ripples, and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. But reality tugged me back. Karen wasn't going anywhere quietly. I squared my shoulders and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. This lake had always been a sanctuary, but today, it was also a battlefield. I would defend it, and I knew exactly how. I approached the gate slowly, feeling the rough wood beneath my fingers as I reached for the lock. Every step seemed to amplify Karen's voice behind me, her shrill protest slicing through the calm of the lake like a warning siren. "You can't just lock this," she screamed, her arms flailing as if the sheer force of her outrage could override ownership. I paused for a moment, letting her words wash over me without losing my balance. She didn't understand the first rule of the lake: calm resolve was far more powerful than frantic shouting. With deliberate movements, I lifted the padlock and clicked it shut. The sound seemed almost ceremonial, a small, sharp declaration that this land belonged to those who respected it. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief, her jaw tightening as she gestured wildly. "I have rights. You can't do this. The community deserves access," she shrieked, hopping from one foot to the other like a performer on a stage, desperate for attention. Her drama was exhausting to watch, yet I couldn't help but notice the absurdity of it all. Here she was, all fire and fury, while I stood calm, grounded, and completely in control. She started pacing along the gate, slamming her clipboard against the wood for emphasis. "This is harassment. You're violating community rules. I'm calling the HOA right now." Her voice cracked with emotion, veering between rage and desperation. I simply watched, leaning casually against the gatepost, fishing pole slung over my shoulder, the sun glinting off the water behind me. This was my lake, my peace, my escape, and nothing she could say would change that. Karen's calls for witnesses fell on deaf ears. The few other neighbors who wandered near the property line kept a careful distance, probably too wary to intervene. I could see the frustration building inside her, a boiling storm that threatened to explode at any second. And yet, no matter how loud she screamed, no matter how many threats she flung my way, I felt an almost meditative calm. Every argument she made was a reflection of her own entitlement, not my fault or my concern. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of screaming, Karen took a step back, huffing, hands on her hips. She glared, panting, but I could see the first flicker of doubt in her eyes. The gate remained locked, and the lake stretched out behind me, untouched and serene. I allowed myself a small smile. The message was clear: boundaries respected, peace restored, and the lake remained exactly as it should, mine to enjoy. Karen didn't give up. If anything, her frustration seemed to feed her determination. Pulling out her phone, she began frantically dialing, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through contacts. "Hello, HOA president? Yes, it's urgent. He's locking the gate at the lake, he can't do that. We need intervention immediately." Her voice was sharp, dripping with panic disguised as authority. I watched from the dock, leaning on my fishing pole, letting her squabble with invisible enemies play out like a poorly rehearsed drama. As she rattled off her complaints, I could see the neighbors she tried to rally glancing over their fences or from across the road, curious but cautious. Karen waved her arms like a general rallying troops, calling out, "The lake is for everyone. You have to do something." Yet, there was no army here, only the quiet trees and the shimmering water, unmoved by her theatrics. It struck me as almost comical, the way she tried to assert power over a place she clearly didn't understand or own. Her attempts to involve the HOA escalated quickly. Calls were followed by texts, emails, even a few hastily scribbled notes she tried to hand off to neighbors walking by. Each attempt was met with polite nods or blank stares, but no action. She was beginning to realize that authority on paper didn't translate into control on the ground. Meanwhile, I continued my routine, baiting hooks and casting lines, letting the gentle ripple of the lake and the occasional splash of a fish break the tension that she was trying desperately to manufacture. At one point, she stomped toward me, clipboard raised like a shield, her face flushed with fury. "You think you can just ignore the rules? This isn't just about your family property, it's about community rights. Do you hear me? Community rights." I didn't respond, keeping my eyes on the water, letting the silence speak louder than any argument could. Her energy was burning out, each outburst more uncoordinated than the last, while I remained calm, steady, unshaken. Hours seemed to stretch like elastic, with Karen pacing back and forth, calling, arguing, demanding, and ultimately failing. Her threats lost momentum, her dramatic gestures growing increasingly desperate. The sun reflected off the lake, glinting across my shoulders, and I finally allowed myself a deep breath. The lake remained untouched, serene, and utterly mine. Karen's storm of entitlement had no power here, no matter how loud or persistent her rage. Peace, once again, reigned over the water, unbroken by the chaos of the outside world. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting golden streaks across the surface of the lake. The light shimmered on the ripples, turning the water into molten gold, and for the first time all day, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Karen's shouts had faded into muttered complaints, her energy finally spent, and the lake's serenity returned, unbroken by her theatrics. The gate remained locked, a simple padlock securing not just the property but my peace of mind, a tangible symbol of boundaries respected. I settled onto the dock, the rough wood warm beneath my hands, and dipped my toes into the cool, clear water. The gentle lapping against the shoreline felt like a reward after the chaos of the day. I cast my line into the lake, the bait floating just beyond the golden reflections, and immediately felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. This was what I had come for: quiet, solitude, and the gentle tug of a fish on the line, a simple pleasure that required nothing more than patience and a little luck. Behind me, the faint crunch of gravel indicated Karen's continued presence, though she kept her distance now, as if realizing the futility of further confrontation. I could hear her muttering to herself, waving her arms occasionally, but it was more like background noise than a real threat. The lake seemed to absorb her anger, letting the water remain calm while her frustration ricocheted harmlessly into the trees. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had tried to storm my sanctuary, but it was impossible to storm something that was inherently yours. A fish tugged on my line, breaking my reverie.